only tell you the barest minimum
just
about
wondering.
Music XML. I'm sorry to say. Yeah, I
No,
know it's
that's great.
potentially a really useful thing. I had some bad experiences with I forget what two apps I was trying to get to talk to each other with that, but it
Was it
was
Sibelius and Finale?
It was
no, I
Sibelius
think
and Lilypond for me.
I think it was Lilypond, and I forget what else, but it was like so obviously not worth the time to figure. Like it would have just been quicker to like redo the work basically. And I got frustrated. I wasn't sure. It may have just been partly my ineptitude at the time, but it left a really bad, mental taste. But I'm sure it's a great, useful thing that people use successfully all the time.
Kind of scary, just like not knowing what background settings may be floating around in the important file. I think anytime I've had to transfer a piece from when I was using MuseScore, I took the XML file, imported it into Sibelius, and then just filtered out the notes and copied them over and left like everything else behind.
Yeah.
Okay, just wondering. What happened was that Caitlin sent us a thing in Music XML from Sibelius, and I tried to compile it and it had tons of trouble, and then it still looked bad. But she eventually sent a PDF, so it's okay.
Mm.
We hate on PDFs a lot, but actually it's very universal and very it's relatively good. Except for like Adobe, which I hate, but what can you do?
Yeah.
I mean, it's better than the other universal thing worth hating, MS Office, because at least PDF is like good.
MS Office is pretty good. I mean, Open Office looks terrible.
Oh no! I'm talking about someone who uses LaTeX.
Okay.
Is used to telling the documents how to format themselves. Every time Office tries to help, I spend about three times as much time fixing it.
Yeah, I spent 4 years as a math major and never even learned how to use LaTeX. Maybe a mistake, but it's okay.
It's ironic though, because that's kind of similar in some ways to Lilypond.
Lilypond? Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I use Lilypond because I'm cheap and I want to be a hipster.
My understanding is that Lilypond is built on tech.
Yeah, it's basically that paradigm, but with a lot of custom syntax
I just didn't feel like paying money. I didn't want to use MuseScore.
I mean,
our group is using MuseScore, Sibelius, and Lilypond, so somehow we'll have to pass it around.
Yeah.
But I think we'll probably just use PDFs.
That's probably easiest.
I've been using AudioSculpt to like very intensely transcribe train sounds.
Mm.
It's wacky.
It has been a time.
So how's the train group doing?
Sorry?
How's the train group doing? Like, what's the sitch?
I've been transcribing sounds and people have been like making things out of them.
Ooh.
Basically.
Nice.
Is what's been happening so far. Because I have the software needed to like go and find the individual hertz of like spectral components of sounds because AudioSculpt.
Are you using? Oh, okay, never mind. The only one I know for that is like Spear.
Mm-hmm.
Spear would probably be able to do that too. I mean, I haven't used Spear, but it's like a way of doing that too.
If you want to see my cooking
Spear
process.
is Bay.
Mm-hmm.
We love Spear.
Yeah, I had to use Spear for a class, and I just took like a meow, I think, and made that into a piece because we were studying spectralism.
Oh, was that the class when Max Friedman did the Screaming Sheep transcription?
It was, except I think it was a goat. Actually, I can't remember, but yes.
Oh no, I always was calling it a goat mistakenly earlier on, but it
was a sheep. Oh, that's amazing.
Sorry, that's my one contribution to the tech discussion so far.
That's okay. How's the Foldy Draw group going?
We meant to, but over half of us have just been very adversely affected by the election mental health wise, so everything just kind of fell apart. Yeah, that's how I feel too. Shit will get together. We are spending the week supporting each other emotionally instead of artistically collaborating. The plan is
I think that's more important. I went to a talk by Joey Gaidry, the bassoonist, yesterday, and he said something like, well, Actually, I realized it wasn't like new, like groundbreaking info or anything, but yesterday he was telling the audience, like, you have to take time to rest. You have to set yourself up for success. You should practice your etudes and stuff, but you also have to take time to rest. So, and then I like took the rest of the night off.
Is Guidry how you pronounce his last name?
I have no idea.
Oh, okay. I assumed it was Gidry when I looked at it. Anyway, really soon composer and electronicist who Julian introduced you.
So I had a real tech question. I guess I'll just ask. Well, I'm gonna ask it while myself is cooking. So I'll wait a few more minutes because I gotta cook. I do have a more general tech question though, if you want to.
Sure.
So our group is thinking about the paradigm of not paradigm, but the sort of scale between acoustic and electric, right?
Mhm.
Our story is based on like a deal with the devil where the protagonist gains access to a more kind world. And I think I'm in charge of the movement that's mostly acoustic probably, but eventually I think one of the ideas that was floating around, and Stacy can attest to this, was the idea of just instruments kind of degrading into electronic sounds. How do, I know it's a very vague idea, but
How do they do that?
yeah, what would be some cool things to do? I guess last time I think you said something like just play around with stuff in Audacity, which is fun.
Yeah, well, I think if I remember correctly, the two things that came to mind about that were there's kind of this divergent approach where electronic sounds excuse me, could mean actually electronic sounds, or it could mean acoustic sounds that have been really heavily processed in some way. And so if it's electronic sounds, then you can come up with whatever you want, and then there's different ways you could think about trying to make more of a transition and less of a strict juxtaposition between them, if that makes sense. But if it's acoustic sounds that are really manipulated, I think that's where the Audacity thing came in, because you could experiment with just cutting things up, pitch shifting them, adding various effects, granular effects, a ton of reverb, reversing sounds, whatever, come up with textures that are based on acoustic sounds, but really, really go pretty far from what the source sounded like. So yeah, that means there's really no right or wrong way to do that. If that is appealing, to experiment with that, you could do Audacity, you could use Reaper, you could use Ableton Live, you could use some sort of Max MSP, SuperCollider, whatever, as far as just creating weird sounds.
Nice.
But I mean, I think ultimately, if you create them from acoustic sounds, they're definitely going to still have a certain quality of complexity that's inherent to most acoustic sounds. And if you really want more of a capital E electronic texture, if that sounds more aesthetically pleasing, in this context of that piece, it's probably better to just make electronic sounds, if that's the goal, to have something that's really synth sounding or whatever.
Yeah. I'm partially thinking about workflow and work distribution, because in our group, I think we really only have one person who's experienced in making electronic-ish music. And I want to contribute somehow, because I think that'll be a fairly big part of the aesthetic. So I think I'll probably have to think about what kind of easy-ish things. Because I remember last time we were talking about SuperCollider, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, how do I get past the beeps and boop stage? And you were like, well, you should think of something you really want to do and just try to get good at that in the weeks you have. And then I didn't really make any progress in the last week, so whoops.
That happens.
Yeah,
SuperCollider could be good, or even just using something like Reaper, or probably not Audacity, but something a little bit more flexible and powerful. And you could just there's so many free plugins and things, it wouldn't be that hard to just download some stuff and have a new a track with a MIDI instrument, whatever it is, and then just like stack up a whole ton of different plugins and create some kind of really weird, interesting texture, stuff like that. You could just play around with different combinations of things that are freely available like that until you find some stuff you like. And then you could create the electronic part by either playing with, like a controller of some kind, or just, writing in the MIDI notes, and it could be played out through Reaper that way. Because the Super Collider thing is definitely doable, but it's definitely a higher
Learning
curve, and so it may not be too practical for the project.
Yeah, I kind of figured out how to make like MIDI type kind of things in Reaper with the little virtual keyboard thing, and also I was making a click track for another project, and I think I kind of figured it out, but not like extremely, but basically enough that it could do some stuff.
Yeah, and there's lots of plugins in Reaper to begin with, and then obviously you can download tons more. Lots of free, even like whole suites of different things out there that are available. So.
It'll be a little while before I get past the beeps and boops stage of Super Collider, but that is okay.
Beeps and boops have their appeal.
That's true. But I don't know how to record the beeps and boops either.
Yeah, so that's the other thing. There are ways you can do that in Super Collider, but it's a little bit clunky. So like you can program in a little section that will write the contents of a buffer to your computer, to a WAV file or whatever. So that's one way of doing it. Or you could pipe the audio out of Super Collider using, Soundflower or VB Cable or one of those things, into something like Reaper, and
okay. I do have VB Cable, yeah.
record it into a timeline, because Super Collider has no timeline and it has no, recording controls per se. So like strictly speaking, you can definitely record the output of it, but it's not the most straightforward thing in the world to do.
Okay. Well, I'll ask a more specific question later, but thank you.
It's sort of weirdly hypnotic to see all the stuff that you're doing, or like you're holding, a piece of a vegetable or like some sort of herbs or spices, but like we can't see anything that you're actually doing. It'd be kind of cool to see like a cooking show where like the perspective completely hides what's actually being done, and you just see like,
Yeah, what do you think I'm making?
Yeah, I have no idea. I could not possibly imagine.
Were you watching me slice open a pumpkin? This pumpkin has been on my piano
but that's
for
what
like
I'm saying.
3 weeks.
That only adds to the confusion. Like you open up a pumpkin and then it's like, now what?
Let me think.
You should keep it hidden for the suspense until it's done. Yeah. Oh, yeah, right. To reroute. Yeah. Lily Pond does have playback, but it's just it just is like a horrible
well, does it really?
MIDI thing that will play back the notes, and you can choose.
It just like outputs a MIDI that you then have to like use another program to listen to. Really?
No, you can play it in, or like in Frescobaldi anyway. You can play it. Yep, it has this like.
Does it?
It's like a horribly bad. Yeah, it can do a click, I believe. I'm like 90% sure it can, but I don't know if it will output that. It might just play it while you know what I'm saying, like while you.
Because in Sibelius, like, Sibelius has a mixer.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did to create a click track for like all of my stuff was just solo the click track and mute everything else, and then export the audio.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like a super easy way of making a click track.
Yeah,
Reaper can make click tracks, can't it?
Yeah, pretty much anything like that you could do. Yeah, Lily Pond, you could also do it if you have like I forget the terminology, but when you share the score. I'm about to
put it in the oven. Do you want to see it before it goes in the oven, or should I not reveal it yet?
Does Frescobaldi play back the MIDI in a way that I could send it to another app or to a hardware device?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I think it's internal, and then it just plays through like these really horrible, you know, like synth piano or synth violin, whatever, to like give you a rough idea of what the score sounds like. I don't think it outputs, but like Julian said, it will save a MIDI file as well when you render the score, so you can get like a PDF and a MIDI version of your score or your part, and then that could be brought into something else. So it'd just be an extra step or two. But I don't think in real time.
Another way to process sounds is Paul Stretch.
Yes, Paul Stretch, not to be forgotten. And also convolution plugins. I always recommend that people mess with them because they're just, it's so cool and weird to play with. Like, you know, there's one in Reaper, you know, so they're expecting you to load in a brief impulse response file. But if you put in like a clip of someone playing, you know, some random thing, you know, like whatever, B flat 3 on a grand piano, and then you like convolve all of the audio input with that recording, it sounds super weird and interesting. Like, we're not used to hearing that effect. I think it's not like a classically, you know, recognizable effect. And if you know, if you're not doing a reverb like the way it's supposed to work.
I found a great convolution reverb item for Max MSP.
Like a new
really easy to load anything object. You happen to record into.
That's awesome. Is that like a third party additional, you know, from a library, or is it built into the like vanilla
in
Max?
The libraries that you can install from within the program?
Oh, that's great.
What, HISST? So at first I thought it was an external thing, but it actually is part of the program now.
That's good to know.
It's pretty simple to build a patch around that will let you take any sound you like and use it as the reverb.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. Does anyone have any, maybe it doesn't have to be today necessarily, but I was just thinking for the next workshop, I probably will do another little presentation of some kind if there aren't, you know, like a ton of questions. And I was just curious if anyone here has stuff that they would particularly want to have covered, you know, whether it's like more on mixing and mastering. We didn't really delve that deep, I suppose. We could do like more on that, or Super Collider, or home recording, or whatever. Just happy to hear any requests if anyone has anything. No pressure, of course.
I maybe have oh, sorry.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say that I at least really appreciated when Gabriel displaying a track that you'd been working on mixing and mastering in Reaper. And more of that could be cool, or also maybe doing something similar with a patch in Super Collider, which is more of a selfish thing just because I want to know more about Super Collider, and it would be cool to just kind of see it in action.
Yeah, definitely. Piano specific tips, yeah.
Yeah, I also had a question about mixing. We haven't really gotten there yet, but so no one in our group is very experienced with mixing. So we want to set up something where it's easy for us to share work in progress in mixing. Can we put our Reaper project into a Google Drive and expect it to work on multiple different computers, or is there anything special?
The only thing you need to do that I would recommend doing is, just to keep things really simple, is create a folder that has all of the files in it as one self-contained entity. So in other words, not only the project files, but the actual recording, you know, media files. And then that way it should be a non-issue for anyone to open it on any operating system. The only thing that gets to be a pain when you're trying to share files like that is, you know, if it's linked to something, you know, like if a there's a recording in the project that is not present and Reaper can't find it, and now it's like grayed out and you can't play it, you know. So if you just keep them all in the same folder and like all the audio is in the same folder as the project, then that will never happen. So
Yeah, I've just been doing a collaboration with someone in Reaper that involved some Google Drive sharing like that, and it really is kind of a drag when the Reaper project generates a stem file that you don't know about, it's not in Google Drive folder, like if you've modified it on your own computer. So that was kind of a headache, and it's just something to watch out for.
mhm.
Does Google Drive have a desktop application?
I don't think so. I think it's only browser.
I think it does.
Yeah, does it?
Wait, I have like a sync with Drive function on my computer.
It's quite integrated into my Mac.
Hmm.
file
Okay.
system.
Okay, I didn't realize. I should probably install that because using it in my browser, it's so slow. It's a serious pain. Because I was thinking like using something like that or Dropbox or Mega,
Right.
something like that, something that syncs automatically
Yeah.
is. For me, it's a lifesaver because I'm not nearly organized enough to remember to constantly update things
Mhm.
online. So having everything constantly synced so I can access it is like,
Yeah.
has been a lifesaver more times than I can count. So if everyone has it set up so they have a copy of that same folder right on their computer, then everyone's edits should constantly be updated. So that hopefully you don't have any whatever it's called when you have two different versions that kind of splinter off.
Right. And also just having good, you know, file naming practices and stuff if you're doing multiple versions of stuff. Yeah. I mean, it's easy to have like good intentions and then get a little bit careless, and then you end up with like a bunch of things where it's like, oh shit, which was the most recent one? And then, or like the good one, especially if you can't figure it out just by time stamps and stuff, because it was like, no, actually it was like the one before the most recent one that was the best, and then like, oh, but anyway. There's a really good free app I've been using lately called Advanced Renamer, where you can basically batch rename files. So like if you have a whole bunch of recordings, you know, as part of a project that has, you know, like 50 takes times 8 microphones, you know, you have like hundreds of audio tracks, and you wanted to add like V2 to all of them or something, you know, you can use this app to like rename files in that way. And there's all these little like, you know, variable fields where you can use, you know, little like $ whatever to like be a stand-in for a character to like format it the way you want it to look and stuff like that. It's pretty cool for staying organized with stuff like that. Yeah. Stacey, with the piano specific tips, I'm just curious, did you have like a particular project or you know, something that's like the direct impetus for that, or more just like general knowledge, you know?
Yeah, I think general knowledge would be good for me at this point. I never quite know what I'm doing because it all feels random, and then often I realize like I've made it worse, and then I just go with my initial recording without adding anything to it. So yeah, my mixing skills are such that I make things worse most of the time.
Well, actually, to be fair, I'm really not just saying this. I think the longer I do, at least for, you know, classical music or acoustic music recording, the longer I've been doing it, I do less and less and less processing, but I try harder and harder and harder to use the right microphone for the right thing, put it in the right place. You know, if there's some sort of issue and there's a way you can solve it acoustically, like with a baffle or with changing the orientation of things, you know, I'm always trying to do those things first, and then the whole mixing stage is basically more like assembly of the parts and balancing them, and just a little bit of you know, sweetening and stuff like that. But the majority of the work is like problem solving work, so like maybe if you do need an EQ, it's like, well, I tried my best to do this thing, but there's still like some bleed from this other instrument, and like now I have to deal with that. But in other words, like I'm almost never doing mixing as part of like a constructive process to like to add something or to like improve something, other than a little bit of compression or reverb or something to just glue it all together and make it sound a little more polished. But I mean, that's just me. I know some people are really into kind of micromanaging the sounds, but I'm not one of them.
I would say that was consistent with my experience when I was doing the Schubert video. That was the thing I was asking
That was
about.
very good, by the way.
Oh, thanks. I was having a phase issue.
Yes.
And I went back and re-recorded it, and I recorded all the oboe 1 part standing and all the oboe 2 parts sitting. So the microphone was just like a little bit different in how it was relating to the instrument.
Yep.
And still pretty close, but a little bit different. And it came out okay. It was better. But then I tried so many different reverb settings, and I did a little bit of EQ on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came back the next day and undid most of them.
Yeah.
Because when I'd been sitting there playing around with reverb, of course, I'd gone way, way too far.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was totally that question. That's probably a fairly universal thing.
Yeah, I felt a little bad when I did that demo with the mixing and mastering session, just because a lot of what I was doing, I know is like pretty subtle. I'm sure, especially listening over Zoom, but it's that kind of thing where it's very easy to go overboard. And like, I know for reverb in particular, a rule of thumb I've heard for classical, at least recording, that a lot of people will advise is that you, if you're going to use a reverb, turn it up until you can like just barely hear it, basically, and then turn it down like 6 dB from there. And so you're like not even really aware of it, but if you bypass it, you probably will notice a little bit of a difference. But it's definitely like, little pinch of salt, little dash of pepper. There's no like, it's definitely not like a barbecue workflow kind of.
We do have a problem in that pianos and string instruments all have a certain amount of natural resonance,
mm-hmm.
and wind and brass instruments don't.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you're close miking them, that can be a really weird thing. Yeah. And so you're trying to help them to sort of coalesce a bit more.
Yeah.
So one thing that you could try, which is a little bit weird, but it might be worth a try, is on the non-resonating instruments, or at least not as much, a little bit of reverb whose purpose is not to create like a reverb tail, but just to create a sense of greater space. So you could set the parameters very low so that the reverb time is like less than a second, and the if you have control over the early reflections versus late reflections, you pretty much ignore the late reflections. Like you're not trying to create the impression of a space, but with a few early reflections, it could help make that feel less dry and less focused without making it sound reverby. And then by the time it all blends together, it might work better. I know over the summer for the inaugural Z Festival, with the ensembles, because I was doing mostly mixing for that one, for the ensembles, and there were quite a few instruments between these 3 different ensembles that had been recorded like super, super, super close, and it just sounded out of place, like too dry. And I did that selectively, a little bit of reverb of that kind on those tracks, and it's not a perfect fix, but it definitely will take the edge off with that kind of situation. And you could even try, if you're doing a convolution thing, they make weird impulse responses for, like you can find like a impulse response of like a, inside of a wine barrel, or like all kinds of random stuff, so even it could take a little bit of trial and error, but it might be that convolution with an impulse that's not even from like a room per se, but just from some other kind of volume would work well for that. Yeah. Yeah, this whole remote collaboration thing is such a challenge to make it sound cohesive. It's an interesting time.
I mean, what I did for my project over the summer was I just kind of panned everyone into like roughly where they'd be if they were like actually sitting on a hall, like in a hall on a stage, and then like gave it kind of a room reverb.
Yeah.
And that made it sound a lot more coherent.
I think just those. Yeah. So too loud in only one place. So right. So when you say too loud, Stacy, you mean like it was gonna clip or something, it was gonna overload, right? So strictly speaking, that would probably not be a place to use compression at all if the dynamic range of the rest was be okay, in your opinion. So for that type of situation, a limiter is what you would use typically, which is, to be fair, technically basically a compressor, but where the ratio is like 100 to 1 or 1,000 to 1. So a compressor would act typically more frequently throughout, like through the whole. That's awesome. Like for a compressor, a situation where you'd use a compressor is like, you know, if you have like a recording where, you know, it's like it goes really loud and it comes down, and like there's too much constant variation and you want it to just be more homogeneous, so the compressor will like smooth that all out and make a compressed distance between the loudest and the softest material. But for that kind of situation, there's like this one loud spike that you don't want. You could either use a limiter or even like manually edit with like a volume envelope. You know, if you have like a volume, like an automation for the volume, basically, you could see like a little separate track for that and like draw in, you know, a dip to bring it down only in that one spot. You know, that's basically what a limiter is doing. So I think, not to belabor it too much, but this is just reminding me of a really long time ago, I forget who told me, but some older engineer just made this point. I thought it was so effective, where they're saying that compressor or a limiter or a gate or an expander, like any of these things that affect the dynamic range of the material, all it's doing is basically what you hypothetically could do with a fader if you were, you know, infinitely fast and responsive with your hand to track the nuances of the signal. Like all it's doing is automating the motion of the volume in some way. And even though the subjective effect of that can be really different depending on whether it's a compressor or whether it's a limiter or whether, but that's all it's doing. It's just, you know, riding the fader like thousands of times a second, basically. Oh, very nice.
The result.
Very nice. Wow.
It's just a bunch of stuff thrown together and roasted in an oven.
That's a time-honored technique.
And couscous. Okay, I had a real question. Let me prepare it. So while we were on a Zoom call for a meeting, Ari's voice suddenly got like extremely distorted, and we were like, "Wow, that sounds really cool." So let me find the audio files.
Like an artifact of like weird glitchy Zoom streaming audio.
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, it was really cool, and we're all like, "Wow, that sounds like a devil." I wonder if we can make that sound. All right, here it is. I'm gonna share screen for a second. Share. Okay, so here's Ari Devil Voice 1.
I hope this doesn't go away. It's voice. I'm double. I'm devilish. Like this is. What else do I say?
That's about all we got.
That's really awesome.
Yeah, we didn't know how it happened, and we don't know how to replicate it either. But what do you think? How can we like replicate this
I think
kind
you
of
could
sound?
definitely. I think you could definitely replicate it. Could you play it one more time?
I hope this doesn't go away. Its voice. I'm double. I'm devilish and like.
So I'm hearing like 3 different
What
things.
else do I say?
Yeah, that's awesome. So there's a lower component that's obviously like an octave or 2 below her actual voice, and then there's this kind of like brrr, like almost like a granular sounding thing, and there's a delay, like a I, like all mixed in. So you could try to recreate that like in Reaper with different, like the way I would do that in Reaper is have 3 tracks that are all taking the microphone input, and then one track do a delay, and in another track do pitch shift. So you can control the relative amount of them. And yeah, I think for like the kind of thing, you could probably with either some sort of granular plugin, or maybe with maybe even with like a bit reduction, bit crusher, like lo-fi kind of plugin, you might be able to get something pretty close to that effect. And so then you would have like 3 channels, one for the echo, one for the bit reduction thing, and one for the low frequency, and you could adjust their relative levels so that the mix is where you want it to be. And you'd have a sort of little template for creating that effect.
Why not just record, like, why not just put the microphone into one track and then like bus it or whatever to other tracks and add the VSTs to those?
Oh yeah, you could do it that way too, sure. But just to have
Okay.
independent control over the different components rather than like a chain of all 3 in one track, because then it'd be hard to
I see.
like, yeah.
Right, because then they would like affect each other.
Yeah, exactly,
Like,
exactly,
okay.
exactly.
That makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. Although to be fair, I mean, who knows? Maybe it would sound cool if you did. Yeah, always try that. Yeah, I think that's doable. That's a really cool sound. I like that. It's
Yeah, we
different.
don't really know how it happened. I think Ari's internet connection was not that good that day, and so like for a few seconds it was just like that, and then it went back to normal. But we managed to record some of it because with the recording function.
It also sounds like maybe something was freaking out with the echo cancellation and stuff, because I feel like usually when people's voices glitch out in Zoom, they have that effect where it becomes almost like pitched, where it'll be like or you get these kind of like artifacts, but that like her voice was audible the whole time. It wasn't like it was like I'm talking and I sound like a devil. Wow, this is weird. But it's like blah, 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 the whole time, I mean, that was a very poor, but you know what I'm saying.
It sounds like what happens if your computer and your sound audio interface aren't thinking that they have the same sample rate.
Oh yeah. Sample rate, yeah.
Or like half the samples, like the computer gets half the samples or gets all the samples, but is still expecting twice as many.
Mm-hmm.
And just has silence to play until it gets the next bunch of data.
Yeah. I mean, if you had a better, like if you do a test in Reaper or whatever to try to come up with this sound, and you figure out like, oh yeah, it's, this seems to be it, and oh, that bit crusher thing worked really well. You could probably in Super Collider come up with a patch that would do this. Super Collider is really good for that kind of stuff. You could do, on live input. Yeah, or Max for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a very specific technical question I had. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a cool question. It's worth the wait.
That is kind of the experience of Zoom calls, though. And if you're making a piece about trying to talk to people over the internet, that's and like have relationships in COVID time, that's pretty cool. That would be a way of, like, that's an experience that everyone has had now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another thing along those lines that would, if you for some reason wanted to imitate the sound quality of Zoom, I feel sort of nauseous saying that, but you could, deliberately downsample your audio because I forget what the sample rate is, but I know it's a lot less than, you know, like a CD, like 44.1 or 48 kilohertz.
It's like 32.5.
Yeah, at the most, it's way lower, and you know, it's obviously filtering out a lot of the audio too. So like you could take a recording, like to approximate it, maybe you could like take a recording and then make a low quality MP3 of that recording and then downsample it and then run it through like a gate or something so that whenever there's like just background noise, it like just drops out entirely, like the way Zoom tries to manage the, you know, like that would probably make it sound a lot more like Zoomy. Although why you'd want to do that is a fair question.
Has anyone here read Sweet Bro and Hella Jeff? Oh, never mind. It's a webcomic where it looks incredibly low quality, and to make it low quality, the author just like saves it as a JPEG and then puts it back into Photoshop and turns the quality all the way down, and then imports it again and turns it even more down. So he just keeps introducing artifacts into the image.
That stuff can be kind of cool. I remember hearing a really interesting electronic piece a long time ago where they had taken the output file. I think it was completely electronic sounds, and then they made an MP3 of it that was pretty low resolution MP3, so that there's like a really big difference between the MP3 and the original high-res file. And then they inverted the polarity of one of them and played them back together so that basically everything that's in common between the MP3 and the original would cancel out, and you would only be left with like the difference material, which was super glitchy and weird and kind of like fascinating sounding. And then that was the ultimate, you know, piece. So you never got to hear the kind of the original intermediate part, but it was really fascinating to like hear this track and just be reminding yourself the whole time that basically this is what an MP3 algorithm throws away and thinks you don't need to hear, because by it flipping the phase of the MP3 and summing them, you're basically only preserving like what an MP3 would throw out from the wave original. It's kind of cool. I was thinking it'd be fun to make a patch in SuperCollider that would do that in, you know, it couldn't do it in real time, but I don't think it would introduce that much latency. It'd be kind of cool. Like play some input and then like a couple seconds later you hear back this really weird mangled thing.
So it's a
that's quite an expression.
You've probably heard me talk about Homestuck
Oh,
once or twice.
I forgot that not everybody knows meme lingo for different types of memes.
Yeah, it's. I think this was Deep Fried before Deep Fried became a term, because this is from like 2010-ish. It's an in-universe webcomic in Homestuck. So one of the characters in that is creating this. Fun fact. And then eventually, even though it's like a whole joke, it starts to foreshadow events in the main webcomic, which is fun.
God.
Wow.
God, I miss the old internet.
Yeah, this really reminds me of.
And yeah, deep fried is like the term, for anyone who doesn't know, for when you want to make a meme look low quality for shitpost reasons. So you deliberately decrease the quality in Photoshop over and over, like Julian was mentioning for this webcomic.
Oh, although there's something that this has all reminded me of, which is a bit different, which is one of my friends who's also like fascinated by like audio processing stuff. I think it was either him or someone he knew did a thing where they took an MP3 file and like a very processed MP3 file and a completely lossless file, and they somehow ran some sort of algorithm to only preserve the artifacts.
Yeah, that's what I'm describing.
And then, like,
so
yeah.
Maybe I didn't describe that clearly, but that was the same concept. So you would only hear
right.
the yeah. So
They were pretty strange sounding.
Yeah, it's really strange because it's based on all this psychoacoustic research about like where is the ear least sensitive, and so then we can like throw
Yeah.
out all this stuff in those regions and stuff like that. It's really weird.
It's like very high register, strange, glitchy
Yeah,
something.
yeah. And I know they do a lot of stuff like with octaves too, to take advantage of the fact that, you know, like if you hear a frequency, you'll have that like phantom fundamental effect where
Yeah.
like it doesn't have to have that much energy in low
Difference
frequency.
tones.
And then so they'll throw that out, you know, it's weird.
Difference tones are another whole thing. Those are interesting.
Yeah. Really fascinating.
I heard a trumpet concerto this summer where like the orchestra and trumpet player like created difference tones between them. That was a time.
That's awesome. It's been a while since I messed around with it, but I had that patch on Super Collider that I shared quickly that uses like a tonality diamond, like Harry Partch style, where you could put in, you know, your own just intervals. And the point of making that patch was to do this project that I never ended up realizing, but I bought this cheap Guzheng on eBay. That's like, you know, a zither with movable bridges. So it lends itself really well to just intonation. And it can create like really, really weird, intense difference tones. If you have like close just intervals, like they produce especially strong difference tones. When you get the, you know, the math right for that. I wanted to do a piece that was like just based on those, like maybe manipulate, but one of these days.
I know somebody
look at
in
that. Hey, I think I have the same. Well, yours is probably nicer, but
That's my mom's Guzheng.
Mine, no, that's definitely nicer. I take it back. But mine has, I guess it's a pretty standard like style, but mine looks very similar to that with like an inlaid portion in that same spot and everything, but it's not a nice one. It's an awesome instrument. It's such a cool instrument. And I was blown away that I have no memory how like it's normally tuned in terms of like the approximate register, but the low strings I tuned like pretty low, and they're seriously low. It gets down to, you know, like definitely like low cello zone, if not more so. I mean, different sound quality, but it's like very impressively bassy.
There's a Finnish zither-like instrument, which is like traditionally just like 5 or 7 string, but like more recently people have been like experimenting with weird just intonation and microtonal things with these. Like this
Hell yeah.
video, which I'm gonna stick in the chat.
What is it called? I think I've heard of that instrument.
It's the kantele.
Yeah, I love that
Yeah.
instrument. I've heard great, I forget, it was like a ECM record. It was one of those like, it was like just ever so slightly like sleazy, jazzy, chamber, you know, kind of vibe, but someone was playing one of those, and I was really a beautiful instrument.
First suggestion is the Moomins soundtrack compilation.
Oh, this is,
well,
It sounds really cool. It sounds really cool.
I put a just intonation kantele solo like in the chat. So
By the way, Stacy has a cool question in chat.
This is
yeah,
awesome.
Stacy does have a cool way.
That's a piano solo. Oh wow, that's crazy. That would
Put
be
a
really,
gajillion
really.
motors on the tuning pegs.
Yeah, that would be challenging. I mean,
I know Audio Sculpt can do this actually,
yeah.
where you can like actually take the track and like move the tuning gradually. But I don't know where else one could do that.
I mean, I hate to advocate such a sort of like plastic approach, but definitely just doing it with like a really, really high quality, you know, sampling instrument that can be retuned. You know, like if you have like a high, one of those really nice, you know, virtual piano type things where you can make microtonal adjustments to the pitch, you could record the part using like a MIDI keyboard and then have like complete control over all the microtonality. But obviously that's not, I'm sure, what you ideally would have in mind. But yeah, I think like retuning an actual piano, I have a friend who did a couple pieces recently where he was interested in some just intonation, so he retuned a forte piano that it worked out pretty well, but it was very time consuming and it did not want to stay, you know, tuned in those yeah, so I think a piano would be extremely challenging. Like I know for Lamont Young and stuff like that, that he has a guy who does the tuning, and they have to allocate like, I don't know, at least 48 hours, maybe 72 hours before every performance to like let the tuning settle and like make little tweaks, because it just doesn't want to stay put. So.
If you wanna solo that gets progressively more out of tune as it goes, you should just ask a wind player because it's really easy.
Oh.
Yeah,
just go find a church basement and start playing their old piano down there. I'm sure you'll find it drifts further and further out of tune.
That's a zinger.
Yeah, I was thinking of going virtually because I do not have the patience to retune my piano. But interestingly, like I've been taking lessons with Michael Harrison, and I've been doing it like a couple times a month for a while now. And I just last lesson, like he was in a different location. He has three grand pianos, just like side by side, and each one is like, oh, this one is this tuning and this is this tuning. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, that's definitely a different level of preparedness. Yeah, pitch shifting, that could work, but the thing that's kind of annoying about pitch shifting, at least in my experience, when I was doing some just intonation stuff, depends on the plugin, obviously, but it's really annoying to have to specify, like in terms of cents, because you have to know, like if you want something to change a bunch of times, and you just basically have to do a lot of calculations to figure out like how many cents to offset it up or down or whatever. Like ideally, you know, you would have something where you can, I don't know, to have more in terms of the interface of like, how do you specify the changes is what I'm trying to say. Because it could be nice if you could like proportionally change them with like a ratio or like as a decimal, but most plugins that I'm aware of wouldn't let you do that, and you'd have to figure out, okay, so this is, whatever, like a G flat, and then I want it to be this other thing, so that would be how many cents? Okay, and like it's time consuming. Yeah.
I guess one thing that I'd be interested in for your next presentation is, so the first one was very much about, using DAWs in service of taking recorded acoustic audio and making it sound as good as possible. I realize this is super vague, but if you could talk about just, the use of the DAW as a creative tool.
Yeah,
that would be interesting to hear your thoughts on.
Definitely, that's a really good point, actually. That's kind of what I started out doing in the very beginning. I got into like electronic music and sound design and stuff, and so back like when I was undergrad, I was primarily just doing that, like making weird sounds using Ableton as a sound design tool, and not making any like serious recordings or anything like that. So yeah. And I think in a way it kind of goes hand in hand, because there's a lot of projects where you might want to do both, or even if you don't, like I think just having a sense of like, I know how to make weird sounds, like, oh, I can hear this sound and figure out like, yeah, I could reverse engineer that. Like,
yeah, they'll feed back into one another in some way, even if you're
exactly, like you
Yeah.
might be working on something totally different, but just having like those muscles sort of flexed a bit, I think is really helpful, because then you just treat all sounds as like they're just raw material basically, and it's just a question of like, are you gonna like leave them as raw material and appreciate them, you know, like a vegan buffet, or is it gonna be like more of a, you know, roasted in the oven with couscous kind of thing? Yeah.
This was actually vegan too.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there's also the whole musique concrète thing, and like,
There is.
how recognizable do you want things to be or not?
Yeah.
That's the whole rabbit hole.
Right. And also, like, I briefly got interested in that whole, like, minimalist idea of, you know, using only one sound to create like a whole piece. And I think that can be a little bit, I don't know, like if you have a really good reason for doing that, it could be really beautiful and interesting, but to just do that as a sort of like proof of concept can be like a little bit precious sometimes, in terms of like, is this actually resulting in something that, you know, but like as a you know, exercise, it's super cool and interesting. Like I did one with a forget what the sound was. It might have been a door closing or something, but I made like a whole virtual percussion battery that would be like triggered by MIDI, that were all based on that sound. And so like one was like, you know, pitch shifted down, and I just took the beginning and added some effects, and that became like a sort of almost like a concert bass drum. And then, you know, one I was like a bit reduced and like stretched out and then like chopped into little parts, and that created more of like a metallic sort of kind of sound. And, you know, it's fun to do that for sure. And
that's a very easy way to obtain some degree of aesthetic unity.
yeah, it is. That's one thing it definitely has going for it. Yeah, because then it's just built in that you have a certain je ne sais quoi. Yeah.
I don't know who all in here has heard of Pierre Henry, but yes.
Yeah, we go way back. It's a shame though, because the my French isn't good enough to read his book in the, or I'm thinking Pierre Schaeffer, not Pierre Henry, but I
mean,
Pierre Schaeffer's book.
School.
Yeah, same idea. Pierre Schaeffer's book is legit. But I think the English translation is kind of bad. I haven't read it in its entirety, but I did like some facing pages comparison, and I was like, this is not nearly as good, the original, because it's like the, what is it, like treatise on, you know, sound objects or whatever, something like that.
Yeah.
But
is it one of those, is it technical writing or is it evocative writing?
It's very like French writing, like not to be super stereotypical, but it's, you know, it's
that's
like,
what I'm like listening to composers talk about things in any precise way always ends up being the most obtuse nonsense.
It's pretty open-ended, as I recall, in that way, but it's more like there's a lot of terminology that he uses that's kind of like idiosyncratic terminology. Like I don't think people,
that's the thing. Yes.
Yeah, like I don't think people would necessarily say like sound object before that period. I think they were pretty, you know, pioneering in like treating sounds in that way, but the way that it's described in French is very, you know, it's like nerdy but logical, and in English it's like Heidegger or something, you know, it's just like, ugh, why am I doing this to myself?
It's like people say they're going to be very precise and scientific, and they end up doing the exact opposite.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, because they try, but it's very hard to be I guess, precise about these things, but they try really, really hard.
Like
guess is
I
the
remember
thing.
there's a part where he's trying to categorize sounds, which sort of
Yeah.
makes sense, I guess. But like in French, I could be misremembering, but I'm pretty sure like the way he did it in French, it's sort of like onomatopoetic, and it's, you know, like these certain sounds that are, you know, like sort of a, you know, whistling sound or whatever, like a thumping sound. But like in English, it's just this whole like arbitrary catalog of like, you know, scratchy sounds and, you know, slinky sounds and, you know, booming sounds and whatever. It's like that doesn't mean anything. So okay, you have this like catalog, and now I know like, you know, where to put my different sound objects. It's just like, no, that's dumb. I don't think they meant it that way. Anyway.